Pastor should have to work a part-time job. Pastor shouldn't make any money from the church. Pastor shouldn't buy a car. Pastor shouldn't have a house. I think they should be able to do simple things like, retire with dignity. I don't know, they should be able to do simple things like, this is going to be scary.
Ruslan.
My most controversial take yet when it comes to pastors being compensated in ministry and what the Bible actually says about this conversations around compensations, condensation. Yeah, I'm flowing, baby. May shock you. Okay, so this is a meme I posted. I think people misunderstood the point of this meme, okay? And I posted this on my X. If your pastor is wealthier than the people he serves, you should wonder, is he here to help us or are we here to help him? Now, in this conversation, we're going to get into fair compensation for pastors, which may shock you, but we're also going to get into the conversation of Christian businesses, Christian influencers, Christian creators, and where's the line there? Okay, so I said, but if a leader is pastoring in an affluent area, should he have to have a part-time job as well? Okay, now I think this may have went over to some of people's heads, right? But basically, I'm asking, we could be very critical, rightfully so, of the pastor that's got the jet and the mansion and all that kind of stuff. The flip side to this is, well, what if a pastor isn't the most well-paid in his church? What if a pastor is actually on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of compensation in his church, right? What if he's in a very affluent area and he can't do basic things like afford to send his kids to school, afford to buy a home, afford to do, I would say, basic kind of things to be functioning. Now, obviously, there's going to be a spectrum here with regards to pastors that are bivocational and pastors that are full-time. But this conversation extends to just pastors. This conversation is going to extend to someone like myself and what we do here with regards to making videos and selling products and selling the gospel, an accusation that's oftentimes made. And we're going to address all of that here. But let's get into this scripture first and foremost. And this scripture may shock you. This is the beautiful part about the Bible, is the Bible just kind of goes through to the jugular of these conversations. Okay, so check this out. This is the Apostle Paul writing in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Give me a little bit more space. This is my defense to those who sit in judgment of me. Okay, and so Paul is confronting the church of Corinth about all kinds of stuff, and he's specifically then addressing people who sit in judgment of him, probably in this local church, who are being critical of Paul. Now, are they being critical because of the finances? I don't know, but this is a very interesting passage nonetheless. This may shock you. Okay, check this out. It says, this is my defense to those who sit in judgment of me. So Paul's defending himself. Verse 4, don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us, as do the other apostles and the Lord's brothers and Cephas? So not only is he saying that his food and drink should be covered, he's also saying, hey, don't we have the right to travel with the wife the way Peter did? Which is really ironic for folks who say the Pope and the succession of Peter can't have wives, when Peter had a wife that, according to Paul, traveled with him, as well as the other apostles, as well as James. Okay, verse 6, or is it only I and Barnabas who lack the right to not work for a living? Verse 7, who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat its grapes? Who tends a flock and does not drink the milk? Do I say this merely on human authority? Doesn't the law say the same thing? For is it not in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain? Is it about oxen that God is concerned? Okay, so what is an ox, Zach? You know what an ox is?
Ox is like a bull. It's like a cow.
It's like a cow. And do you know what a muzzle is?
A muzzle is the thing that stops them from opening their mouth.
Yeah,
it's like you put it on a bad dog.
Put it on a bad dog. And Paul is saying, hey, don't muzzle an ox. Don't put something on an ox so that he can't get the spare grain, right? And then he says, is God concerned about oxen here, right? Surely he says this for us, doesn't he? Yes, this was written for us because whoever plows and threshes should be able to do so in the hope of sharing in the harvest. Now, this next verse is going to punch many of you in your stomach. And this is and the conclusion I'm going to make in terms of what I expect for ministry, for pastors, for bishops, elders. This is going to shock you. Paul says, if we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest? Translation. If
That's crazy.
a pastor an elder, a deacon, a teacher is pouring into you at a local church level as a church planter, Paul is posing the question, he's making statements, don't muzzle an ox, right? But then he also leans in and says, don't they have the right to reap a material? All you guys are like, material things are bad. Material's bad. Clothes are bad, right? First of all, you're a Gnostic and you're treading in heresy. Second of all, Paul is clearly saying here that if you're sowing spiritual things, you have the right to receive a material harvest. That's crazy for some of the toxic paradigm people have around money, right? Verse 12, if others have this right of support from you, shouldn't we have it all the more? But he says, but we do not use this right. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay? So Paul is saying, hey, we have the right to take a wife. We have the right to food and drink. We have the right to have our material needs met. Those are three very bold claims. But he says, as an exception to the rule, as a way to not cause you guys to stumble, because the church in Corinth was immature, we're going to go above and beyond, and we're not going to do anything to hinder the gospel. That's the above and beyond approach that Paul is taking. So what did Paul do? Paul had a small side business. He was a small business owner. He was a tent maker on the side. And he was preaching the gospel. People take Paul's exception to the rule, and then they make it the standard for pastors everywhere. Pastors should have to work a part-time job. Pastors shouldn't make any money from the church. Pastors shouldn't buy a car. Pastors shouldn't have a house. Paul is saying the total opposite. And specifically, that gut and a punch should be in verse 11 and verse 10, where it talks about not muzzling an ox, right? And specifically, having your material needs met. Okay, so punchline, it is my opinion that a pastor, especially in North America, especially in the West, should be well compensated, because a pastor oftentimes is having to study the scriptures to make sure he presents the word accurately every single week, on top of oftentimes running the affairs of the church, the staffing of the church, and carving out time to counsel and to shepherd some of you knuckleheaded sheep that keep doing the same thing over and over again and coming back to the pastor expecting different results. That's like 5 different job titles that most pastors have to deal with, right? And this is why so many of them burn out. And so if we're looking at what the scriptures say, it's in complete contrast with some of our cultural zeitgeist around this, right? So my opinion is I think pastors should be able to do simple things like, send their kids to college. I think they should be able to do simple things like, retire with dignity. They should be able to do simple things like, this is going to be scary, buy a home. Now, this is going to be subject to different parts of the world. Obviously, this is not going to be possible in parts of China where the church is underground, or North Korea, right? And even say buy a home in Southern California means something totally different than what it means in, say, Alabama or the Midwest somewhere, right? So a home in California, buckle up, to get a home, like an average size home, is like $1 million. Now, $1 million in a different part of the country is a mega mansion. So this is even relative to where you're at, right? And so what we do is we take a very, I don't know how else to say it, Marxist view of money, a very communist view of money, and then we project it and we try to take the scriptures and we contort parts of the scriptures where Paul is saying, hey, I'm the exception to the rule. Peter, Jesus' brother, the other apostles, they had wives, their material needs were met, they were taken care of. And I'm telling you that the principle here is you don't muzzle an ox, and if someone sows spiritually, they should be able to reap the harvest materially. Materially, that's really intense, and that's very contrary to some of the poverty gospel that we've been pontificating here in Western Christianity, because we've seen so many pastors abuse this, right? And so if the pastor is the wealthiest in your local church, well, that's probably not a good look. If you're serving in a poor area and you're flashing around in a luxury car with a mega mansion, that's probably not a good look. The same token, if your pastor is the poorest in his congregation, maybe, just maybe, that should be adjusted somehow to take care of your local pastor, okay? And oftentimes people don't know that yes, of course, thank you, Thrive. They do weddings, they do funerals, they do all kinds of stuff. Many of them have other ventures, right? And so this conversation of pastoral compensation is a tense one. Now, what this then does is this extends to, so that's, by the way, that's a very minority position. Like, I think pastors should be really well taken care of. That's a minority position because most of you guys is pocket watching and you think that all your pastor does is sit around all week and kind of throws together a talk on Sunday. Let me tell you, they do way more than that, and their jobs are way harder than that. And so that's just when we're talking about context, that's the specific context of which should happen to people in a local church. Okay. Now, there are times where, yes, Jesus sends them out and tells them not to take a bag and not to take anything with them. And then there's also times where Jesus sends them out and he tells them to take a bag and take a sword with them. There's both. Right? So that doesn't mean that all pastors or all ministry people or all people everywhere are called to take a vow of poverty and they can't ever retire with dignity. They can't ever have a home. They can't ever have a nice car. Like that's ridiculous. Again, the opposite extreme is also just not a good look, right? And the pastor then has to go above and beyond. If they have other side businesses, side venture, maybe they're killing it in real estate. Maybe they're writing books, right? They need to be careful to communicate these sorts of things, right? That if you get the opportunity to be a best-selling author and the reason why you're driving a luxury car is because you're a best-selling author, well, that's different than you driving a $500,000 car because you are a local church pastor doing that off of tithe. So we should all agree that, hey, private jets, luxury cars, designer clothes probably shouldn't be coming from tithe money. According to the Bible, that prayer is extremely important in terms of us being transformed from the inside out when we get aligned with God's will. For the Christians watching this channel, I want you guys to implement these spiritual disciplines in your day-to-day life. And the only way I've been able to do this consistently is through writing down my prayers in a prayer journal that does a few things. One, it allows me to reflect and come to God humbly and ask Him to move on my behalf. And two, it allows me to document my prayers, which ultimately help me remember the very things that I was praying for and see the hand of God tangibly in my life when He answers them. So I would urge you, consider writing down your prayers. It could be in a blank notebook. It could even be on your phone. Or you could check out the one I personally designed and used for my own quiet time and spiritual discipline that I think will be a huge blessing. It's the exact structure and system that I've used for years to pray and be more consistent in my spiritual disciplines. You can pick yours up today by clicking the link in the pinned comment below. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.